Hello, Brad here. In my last two videos I was shooting instrument approaches, and I happened to mention, if you were watching, that I wasn't going to do any more instrument approaches for a while. Instead, I'm going to return to my roots, and that's flying some general aviation aircraft around over the cornfields, as it were. Although I never flew a Bonanza, it was more like 172s and 182s. But in either case, I can't afford to get back into real aviation at this point. But X-Plane, or any simulator, allows us to enjoy some of the benefits of it without the expense. That said, I don't want to treat it as a toy or as a game, but I want to keep up some of the skills that I learned when I was learning to fly. With that in mind, we're going to do a cross-country flight today using pilotage and dead reckoning, and that starts by drawing a line between 2 points on a map, and as we fly that route, looking on the ground to see if those landmarks on the ground match up with the map. But I'm going to add in one other component today, and that is crosswind. I have to admit that sometimes I just turn off the wind in X-Plane because I don't want my life complicated. But wind is a real world component, so I want to introduce that today and also employ it on our landing into Monterey. So with that said, let's go over and take a look at our map. So we find ourselves in the San Francisco area. This is the San Francisco sectional. San Francisco Bay up to the north, San Jose, Monterey Bay, Monterey itself, the Central Valley over to the east. Even further east we have the Sierra Nevadas and the Salinas Valley here. And our flight today is going to originate at Los Baños, an unusual name if I know my Spanish. And I've just drawn a straight line down to Monterey, and we're going to try to maintain that straight line, compensating for our crosswind. I've selected a cruise altitude of 6,500 feet. It has to be even plus 500 as we head west, and I've got to clear this range here, so 4,500 might be a little tight, so we'll clear it with plenty of room to spare. Two other things to note in our flight: we've got a controlled airport, Salinas, so we will have to talk to the tower or be above 3,000 feet in order to get our flyover. But then we've got this dark red circle, which indicates Class C airspace. So in the box here, we note that within 20 miles, we have to call NorCal approach on 133.0 and get permission to fly into this space long before we talk to the tower. Of course, we can skirt around that at least until we get to this inner red line by flying under 2,500 feet or over 4,200 feet, but probably best just to give them a jingle. So next we're going to take a look at performance charts. How exciting. As promised, here is our performance chart for our Coronado Bonanza Foxtrot 33. Here's the altitude column, and I'm just going to read across here from 6,000 feet. By the way, this is for 75% power or 2,500 RPM. So what can I expect from my airplane? Well, I've got a manifold pressure of 22.2, and then our true airspeed. And true airspeed is your speed through the air, as opposed to indicated, which what you see on your dial, whether it's a steam gauge or a tape. And then CAS is calculated airspeed, which takes into compensation any mechanical issues with the airplane itself. So we're looking somewhere around 168 to 160 knots for our true airspeed. So let's just compensate, or let's just compromise and say 164. And this number will be important as we begin to compensate for our crosswind. I'm trying not to sound like old home week, but back when I learned to fly, the next step in the process would be to go over to the teletype machine and get our winds aloft. But the internet has made that a lot easier today. So there is a link here, aviationweather.gov/wind temp, and I've pulled up the Bay Area. And they don't have a lot of reporting stations, but you can see there's a little flag here, and if you click on it, it shows you winds at, this is at flight level 340, so 130 at 8. And it's interesting to note, if drop down to 3,000, the wind is in a completely different direction. Winds out of 10 at 10 knots. You can also use this map down here to get a chart of numbers. So if we take a look here at KSFO, we've got at 3,000 feet, they're showing winds out of 02 at 8 knots. At 6,000 feet, it's 340 degrees at 7 knots, and the temperature is 13 Celsius. And as you go on up, they just assume it's going to be a negative number for the temperature. But you can see how variable winds can be and how much stronger they can get the higher the altitude. But we're just going to be at 6,000 feet. But I've already dialed in my own winds because they're just not exciting enough for our flight today, so I've exaggerated them. But I just wanted you to see where you could go to pick it up in real life, as it were. So one more stop before climbing onto the airplane. We're going to do some calculations that we used to do on an old device called the EB6. He calls it an E6B Jepson computer in huge quotation marks, which was really an exotic slide rule device that allowed us to calculate our airspeeds and our compensation for crosswind. You can get this version at experimentalaircraft.info. So let's start with our true airspeed, which we will need in just a second. So I'm going to assume our indicated airspeed is going to be 145 approximately, and we'll be at 6,500 feet. And I'm just going to use 2992 standard baro with an outside temperature of 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And we're at 164, and I think that's what we agreed after looking at our performance charts, what we would compromise with. So pretty close. So next we need to plan our course. Go back and look at our map. 226 degrees. So click on nav pre-flight. And we agreed 164 knots. Wind direction 190. And the speed is 25 knots. So I want to notate 221 for my course. Wind correction angle 5 degrees. Not a lot, but enough that would make a difference over the course of our flight. So we are finally in the airplane. Nothing to program, just need to get things started. So battery, alt, and beacon. Avionics on. There we go. Wonder where the lights were. Okay, prop is fine. Mixture rich. Fuel on. And make sure no one's around. Normally we would yell clear. 1200 RPM. This is an uncontrolled field, so normally I would now announce over Unicom what my intentions were. And I am kind of curious what my runway should be. We have 1432. We have winds coming from 190 or this direction, so we'll be using runway 14 and compensating for that crosswind from our right. So why don't I taxi out there, and you can join me at the end of the runway. Well, thanks for joining me again at the end of runway 14 in Los Banos, doing some last minute checks, making sure I've got my lights on, a notch of flaps, and I'm setting my heading bug for our final course. To just act as a reminder, and you can see I turned off the nav flag by dialing in a VOR. I've set my altitude to 6,500 feet. I'm going to let my autopilot do that, and checking the wind off the right side. So I want my right wing down, aileron up, and I will compensate with a little left rudder. And as soon as I get off the ground, I'm going to want to kick the rudder so we can compensate for that wind and stay over our runway. So nose a little bit to the right with our rudder, staying over that runway. So gear is up, flaps 0. Now that we've cleared the end of the runway, start turning towards 221. Come back on my prop to 2,500 RPM. This is a complex aircraft with a constant speed prop, so that's pretty typical procedure. And once I get everything stabilized, I will check for my first landmark, which is that skinny little reservoir off to the left. So we seem to be in good stead. So we are on course. The heading bug is reminding me where we should be. Good visual reminder. It's a lot easier to see that than the little hash mark on our HSI. So we're to be a little bit to the north or right of that reservoir, and then there's a reservoir on the left, the San Luis Reservoir, that will become more obvious as we climb. We're kind of flying in between both of them. So I'm just orienting myself to what I see on the map with what I'm seeing on the ground. Flying over Interstate 5, which runs up from Southern California. Major thoroughfare, and there is a transmission line that I'm seeing on the sectional, and I'm seeing out the right or left side of the airplane. Yeah, you can see it stretching across there. I should point out that I'm using the high definition scenery or mesh from Autopilot. It's It's much better than what comes out of the box from Laminar. Of course, not nearly as good as Ortho, but I'm not going that route. And you can see that we're crabbing into the wind, coming now from the right side of the plane, or I'm sorry, the left side of the plane. Got a little off course there. Better get back underneath that heading bug. So we fly a little bit closer to the reservoir on the left than on the right. And my next, I guess you'd call it major landmark, will be that high peak. And we want to be a little bit to the north of it. I'm adjusting my heading bug for the wind. It's going to be changing as we climb. It was 15 knots on the ground, and it's 25 knots at 6,500 feet. But you never really know exactly what it is, so you have to make those adjustments as you go. And it probably won't be the last one. There's our other reservoir off the right wing, the San Luis Reservoir. These are very important bodies of water. Central Valley, California grows a large percentage of the nation's food. And because California is essentially a desert, that water is really important. There's a whole network of canals that work their way through the valley. One thing I don't like about this airplane is the autopilot. You can't operate it on the instrument panel. It always pops up. So we're coming up on 6,500 feet. So autopilot engaged. I don't know why the nose came down like that. I'm gonna have to figure out how to make that up. And I'm thinning out my mixture, so if you watch your EGT gauge, you pull it back until you see the temperature rise and then fall. So we want to be a little bit north of a valley that's off to our left and a little bit to the north of that highest peak. I'm on a slightly different heading and holding that, and we'll see how well we do. I'm going to try to make up a little altitude here. For some reason we dropped a couple hundred feet. This autopilot doesn't have a vertical speed button. It just has the little rocker switch on the far left. running a little lean, so I'm going to richen up the mixture a little. So you can see that peak just off to our left. And we're just flying a little bit north of the valley that the two arms of the range make. And I'm now adjusting for the 25 knots that are now coming into play at our altitude, cruise altitude. There's that valley I was talking about, and the peak just off the left wing. Now we start looking ahead to our next waypoint, which is a private airport, which on the map it should be slightly on our right. So Christensen is a private field, and I'm looking for it now. It's actually a little bit to the left, so I need to compensate for that crosswind a little bit more. So I'll adjust my heading bug. See if I can't make up the difference. And there's a little lake just at the base of the next range, and if I remember, the map shows that just slightly to the north of our route. Make another adjustment to our heading bug. Again, that's not doing anything except providing a visual reference. So you can see that runway just passing underneath us. So hopefully you can see that little lake just under the H in Hollister. So you can tell that we have made an adjustment that will put us to the south of that slightly. So small adjustments as we go. Again, you really can't count on winds aloft being exact, and they can change depending on forecast and so on. So next, I want to consider our controlled airspace, because we will be above 3,000 feet AGL over the Salinas Airport. We really don't have to give them a call and ask for permission to fly over. So I'm looking for my next landmark. So we've got a freeway that runs across our route through the city of Salinas. Switching tanks. little bit of a freeway I can see that runs just to the left of our path. It looks like it's going up over a pass. So Santa Cruz off to the north. Of course, San Francisco beyond that. We fly over the northern part of the Salinas Valley, where most of your salad comes from. And let's begin our descent. Just a slow descent down to Monterey. So it looks like our final course is working out nicely. I want to be a little bit to the north of the Salinas Airport, which you can see just under the wing. Sorry, I was a little fast there. Couldn't see it. I need to be a little bit more aggressive in my descent. Also, at this point, we would be talking to
Monterey Regional Information
NorCal.
200 Zulu weather.
Approach, asking for permission.
More than 10. Sky conditions
Fly into the area.
19,500 scattered. 34,000.
Picking up the ATIS
scattered. Temperature
at Monterey.
Dew point -11. Altimeter 2992. Arriving runways 28 right, 28 left. Departing runways 28 right, 28 left. Advise on initial contact. You have Delta.
So approach has vectored us for an approach from a straight-in approach.
Monterey Regional Information Delta. 200 Zulu weather.
So we can begin turning a little bit to the south to get lined up.
Sky conditions 19,000.
It's kind of a valley that
34,500 scattered. Temperature
provides a straight-in approach.
-11. Altimeter 2992. Arriving runways 28 right, 28 left. Departing runways 28 right, 28 left. Advise on initial contact. You have Delta.
So we'll turn to the south so we can enter that little valley that will line us up really nicely with 28 left.
Monterey Regional Information Delta. 200 Zulu weather. Wind 190.
Pattern altitude will be about 1250, but we're really not going to be in a pattern. They're clearing us for a straight-in approach, which is really nice. So time to slow down. We don't want to go barreling in there. And trying to avoid any terrain. See the airport off to the right. So when your throttle comes back far enough, you get a warning that your gear needs to come down. I wish it was linked to the airspeed, because I want to slow down a little bit more before I drop the gear. The white on the So we turn towards the airport. You can see runway 28 right and 28 left. 28 right is a small, short runway, probably for practice. So gear down. Mixture rich. Prop full again, just in case we have to do a go around. Let's split the screen so we can see an outside view as well as from the cockpit. You can see the crab angle on the right, crabbing into that wind, trying to stay lined up with the runway. Down to about 80 knots. Just skimming over those trees. So just before we touch down, kick the right rudder, drop the wing, left wing into the wind, set it down on one wheel, and try to keep it going crazy. Always a problem. The next one. So what I'd like to do next is to show you a landing from the other direction. Same wind, so we're going to be crabbing to the right. So we're coming from the ocean side. So this time we'll be kicking the left rudder and dropping our right wing. So this would be 7 right as opposed to 28 left, which you just saw. So left rudder, wing down. Try to keep it steady. So you've seen the challenge of tackling crosswinds for takeoff, or cross country, and 2 landings. So challenge yourself, dial in a little crosswind, and see how you do. Until next time, this is Brett Wild.